Captain Jaren Cross stood at the command nexus of the Worldbreaker, his consciousness partially merged with the ship's neural network. Through the link, he felt the presence of 846 other vessels, their captains' thoughts brushing against his like whispers in a cathedral. The Corvith Coalition fleet moved as one mind, one purpose, flowing through the void toward the small blue world hanging in the darkness ahead. The birthplace of humanity. Empty for 3 centuries, or so every probe and scan had indicated. Captain, the survey drones have completed their final pass, Lieutenant Morishin reported from her station. Unlike Jaren, she kept her neural connection minimal, preferring direct observation. It made her slower but occasionally more perceptive. Minimal orbital activity. Some ancient satellites, degraded infrastructure. No active defenses detected. Jaren felt the collective assessment ripple through the fleet consciousness. Agreement. Confidence. This would be a simple resource extraction operation. Earth's water, rare minerals, and strategic position made it valuable. The fact that humanity's cradle lay abandoned made it easy. Maintain formation Delta 7, Jaren broadcast through the link. 800 minds acknowledged simultaneously. Begin descent protocols for the harvest platforms. The fleet began its approach, massive carriers and frigates moving in perfect synchronization. No commands needed to be spoken. Each captain knew their role, felt their position relative to the whole, understood the dance they performed together. That's when Mora gasped. Captain. New contact. Lunar orbit, emerging from the shadow. Jaren's attention snapped to the tactical display. The neural network buzzed with sudden uncertainty as every sensor operator in the fleet focused on the same point. Something was moving out from behind Earth's moon. At first, Jaren thought it was a station, perhaps a derelict facility they'd missed. But as the object cleared the lunar horizon, his breath caught. Even through the neural link, he felt the collective shock of 847 captains witnessing the impossible. It was a ship. No, calling it a ship was like calling a star a candle. The construct stretched nearly 40 kilometers from bow to stern, a geometric impossibility of midnight black alloy and crystalline architecture. It looked ancient and utterly alien, yet bore markers that screamed human design philosophy. Angular where Corvith ships were curved. Singular where they built in clusters. Silent where they sang with network chatter. Mass readings are. Captain, this can't be right, Mora stammered. It's reading a solid neutronium composite. That's impossible. No species has mastered stable neutronium architecture. Through the fleet link, Jaren felt Admiral Crest Daverin's presence sharpen with interest. The Supreme Commander's consciousness touched his. Analysis, Captain Cross? Unknown, Admiral. The vessel matches no recorded human capability. Yet it's clearly of Earth origin. Attempt contact. Standard protocols. Jaren nodded to Mora, who began broadcasting across every frequency humanity had ever used. Standard greetings. Mathematical sequences. Cultural references pulled from ancient databases. Nothing. The massive ship simply drifted. Not toward them. Not away. Just existing in space like a monument to something forgotten. Then Chief Engineer Talos Ven's voice crackled over the local channel, panic creeping in. Captain. I'm detecting unusual interference in our neural network. It's subtle, but it's spreading. Ship-to-ship coherence is dropping by 0.3% every 10 seconds. Jaren felt it then. A strange thickness in the mental link. Like thinking through fog. Source? He demanded. It's coming from that ship, sir. But I can't identify the carrier wave. It's not electromagnetic. It's not gravitonic. It's something else entirely. On the view screen, the human vessel finally moved. Not with thrust. Not with visible propulsion. It simply began to advance, gliding through space as if the laws of physics were optional suggestions. And as it moved, Lieutenant Morishin grabbed her console with trembling hands. Captain, she whispered, I can't hear the other ships anymore. Jaren reached for the neural link, that constant presence that connected him to the fleet. For the first time in his 30-year career, he reached into that space and found nothing. Silence. Complete and absolute. 847 ships. 847 captains. All suddenly, terrifyingly alone. The human ship continued its approach, and in the suffocating quiet, Jaren Cross finally understood. They had made a terrible mistake. Chief Engineer Talos Ven had served in the Corvith fleet for 42 years, and in all that time, he had never worked in silence. The neural network was life itself, a constant stream of data, diagnostics, and shared consciousness that made every engineer across the fleet into a single distributed mind. They solved problems together, thought together, existed together. Now, staring at his diagnostic panel, Talos felt like he'd been buried alive. "Talk to me, people," he barked at his engineering crew, his voice sounding strange and harsh in the suddenly quiet command center. "What's causing the network collapse?" His subordinates looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. They'd never had to speak aloud during a crisis before. One young technician opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. I don't know, Chief. The hardware is functional. The quantum relays are operating normally. But the signal just ends. Like it's being absorbed by something. Talos pulled up the readings himself, his hands shaking slightly. Every ship in the fleet was broadcasting perfectly. But between each vessel and the next, the signals simply disappeared. No interference pattern. No jamming signature. The network traffic just ceased to exist in the space between ships. And that space was growing. On the Worldbreaker's bridge, Captain Jaren Cross gripped his command chair like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Around him, his officers worked in chaotic confusion, shouting reports that would normally flow seamlessly through the link. "Status of the starboard battle group." Jaren called out. "Unknown, Captain." Mora replied, frantically cycling through communication channels. "I'm broadcasting on all standard frequencies, but there's no response. Visual confirms they're still in formation, but we can't coordinate with them," Jaren finished grimly. He looked at the view screen, where the massive human vessel continued its inexorable advance. It wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. "Get me Admiral Davorin. Direct laser communication if you have to." Mora nodded, hands flying across her console. After a moment, Admiral Crest Davorin's weathered face appeared on the secondary screen, the image flickering with interference. "Captain Cross." The Admiral's voice was tight with controlled fear. "I trust you're experiencing the same phenomenon?" "Yes, sir. Complete neural network failure across the fleet. We're effectively fighting blind." Davorin's jaw clenched. "Not fighting yet. That ship hasn't fired a single weapon." "With respect, Admiral, I think it already has." Inside the Eternal Sentinel, Octavia Wren's fingers danced across controls that hadn't been touched in 3 centuries. The ship responded to her thoughts, her intentions, her purpose. Unlike the aliens outside, she needed no network. She needed no connection to others. She had spent lifetimes learning to be alone. The Sentinel's psychoacoustic resonance field was operating at 30%. That was enough. She could feel the alien fleet's cohesion dissolving like salt in water. Their minds, so dependent on constant connection, were fracturing under the weight of sudden isolation. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way, in the dark years after the abandonment, when they'd been cut off from the galactic community and left to survive alone. While other species built themselves into hive minds and linked collectives, humans had learned to stand singular. To think alone. To fight alone. To weaponize loneliness itself. Octavia increased the field to 40% and watched the alien formation begin to drift. Ships that had moved in perfect synchronization now wavered, hesitated, overcorrected. Captains who had never made independent decisions struggled with the sudden weight of solitary command. "Let's see how you handle true silence," she whispered. On the Worldbreaker, Science Officer Bryn Castellan burst onto the bridge, tablet clutched in his hands. "Captain, I think I understand what's happening." Jaren turned sharply. "Explain." "That ship isn't jamming our communications, it's broadcasting on a frequency that affects consciousness itself. Our neural implants are designed to connect minds, but this signal, it triggers the opposite response. It activates evolutionary fear pathways. The isolation anxiety that every sentient species develops as a social survival mechanism." Jaren felt it then, that tightness in his chest he'd been trying to ignore. The sense of abandonment. The primal terror of being alone in the dark. "You're saying they're weaponizing fear?" "Not just fear, Captain. Loneliness. Existential isolation. For species like ours that evolved as collective thinkers, this is..." Bryn trailed off, looking haunted. "It's worse than any weapon that destroys matter. This destroys connection itself." Across the fleet, the effect intensified. Captain Naira Kessick of the cruiser Stormfront stared at her crew in mounting panic. Without the neural link, she couldn't feel their loyalty, couldn't sense their readiness, couldn't know if her orders were being followed properly. For the first time in her career, she was giving commands and simply hoping they would be obeyed. "Weapon status," she shouted. Charged and ready, Captain, her tactical officer responded. But his voice sounded uncertain. Afraid. Without the network, how could anyone be certain of anything? On the destroyer Blade's edge, Captain Torvin Mir made a decision that would have been unthinkable 20 minutes ago. He broke formation. Navigation, set course away from that human vessel. Full thrust. His crew stared at him in shock. Captain, we haven't received orders to. There are no orders. Torvin roared. Don't you understand? We're on our own. And I'm not staying here to find out what that thing does next. The Blade's edge turned and accelerated away from the fleet. Within minutes, 17 other ships followed. Admiral Davorin watched his fleet dissolve on the tactical display, each ship a lone island in the dark, making desperate individual choices. The perfect formation had become a scattered mob. Transmit fleet-wide on all channels, he ordered hoarsely. All ships hold position. All ships. The human vessel released another pulse. And suddenly, Davorin couldn't remember why he'd ever thought the neural network was a good idea. The isolation felt natural now. Comfortable, even. As if connection had always been an illusion, and this crushing loneliness was the only truth. He looked at his crew and saw strangers. Deep in space, Octavia Wren pushed the resonance field to 60% and whispered an old human prayer. Walk alone, and you walk strongest. The alien fleet was learning that lesson now. Whether they wanted to or not, Science Officer Bryn Castellan had always prided himself on his analytical mind. Where others felt, he thought. Where others believed, he calculated. But now, staring at the data streaming across his console, he felt something he'd never experienced before, philosophical vertigo. Captain, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. I need to show you something. Jaren Cross looked up from his desperate attempts to coordinate with the fragmenting fleet. Unless it's a way to stop that ship, Bryn, I don't. It's the answer to why they're doing this. And it's brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. Jaren crossed to Bryn's station, Mora and Talos following. The engineer had pulled up ancient human files, recovered from Earth's databases centuries ago when the Coalition first catalogued the abandoned world. Look at this, Bryn said, highlighting a passage. Human military philosophy, circa the 21st century. In war, the supreme art is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That's from an ancient strategist named Sun Tzu. We know humans valued deception, Mora said impatiently. What does that have to? No, you're missing the point. Bryn pulled up another file. Look at their psychological research. Humans spent centuries studying isolation. Solitary confinement was considered one of their worst punishments. They knew, intimately knew, what loneliness does to a mind. He opened a third document, this one marked with human military classification symbols. And then, during what they called the abandonment, when the galactic community cut them off for their aggressive expansion, they didn't collapse. They adapted. They learned to exist without connection. To think independently. To operate as individuals rather than collectives. Talos leaned closer, his engineering mind catching up. They turned their greatest weakness into a weapon. Exactly, Bryn confirmed. While we evolved toward hive consciousness, toward constant connection and collective thought, humans evolved the opposite direction. They mastered isolation. And now? He gestured at the tactical display where the eternal sentinel hung like a dark god. They're teaching us what that feels like. Jaren felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't an attack. It was a lesson. A transmission crackled to life across all channels. For the first time since the silence began, a human voice spoke. Corvith Coalition. This is Guardian Octavia Wren of the Eternal Sentinel. The voice was female, calm, carrying the weight of centuries. On every ship in the fleet, crews stopped and listened. You came to my world believing we were extinct. Easy prey. Resources to be harvested. A pause. You were wrong. On the Worldbreaker's bridge, Jaren found himself unable to look away from the view screen where the massive human ship rotated slowly, almost peacefully. Your species built strength through connection, Octavia continued. Through shared minds and linked consciousness. It made you powerful. Coordinated. Efficient. But it also made you dependent. Fragile. You forgot what it means to stand alone. Another pulse rippled from the Sentinel. The resonance field intensified, and across the fleet, alien crews felt the full weight of cosmic isolation. The terrible, beautiful truth of individual existence. Humanity learned a different lesson, Octavia said. We learned that the strongest fortress is the self. The most reliable ally is your own mind. The only certainty in the universe is that you are, ultimately, alone with your choices. Admiral Davorin sat in his command chair, listening to words that felt like they were stripping away layers of his identity. He touched his neural implant, the device that had defined his existence for 60 years, and felt only dead metal. You wanted our world, Octavia said. But you never asked what living alone in the dark teaches a species. You never considered that isolation could be a forge instead of a grave. On the view screen, 11 more signatures appeared on the long-range sensors. Massive. Ancient. Powerful. The Eternal Sentinel is not alone, Octavia announced. 12 Guardians watch 12 sectors of human space. We have slept for 3 centuries, waiting. Watching. Learning your patterns. Understanding your weaknesses. Captain Naira Keswick of the Stormfront made a decision without consulting anyone, without reaching for a connection that no longer existed. She powered down her weapons. We are not here to destroy you, Octavia continued. Destruction is easy. Teaching is harder. So I give you a choice, Admiral Davorin. Captain Cross. Every individual commander in your fleet. Jaren straightened, realizing she was speaking directly to each captain as a separate entity. Not to the fleet as a collective, but to hundreds of individual minds. Stay, and learn what true isolation means. Learn what it's like to fight without your network, to think without your collective, to exist as singular beings in an infinite cosmos. Or. The pause stretched. Leave. Return to your worlds. Tell them that humanity still exists. Tell them we are not weak. Tell them we survived by mastering what you fear most. And tell them, Octavia's voice dropped to something almost gentle, that we will share this lesson with anyone who threatens our sovereignty. We will teach them to hear the silence. Admiral Davorin stood on shaking legs. He looked at his command crew, really looked at them, as individuals rather than extensions of himself. He saw fear. Uncertainty. But also something else. The beginning of independent thought. He opened a direct channel to the human ship. Guardian Wren. This is Admiral Crest Davorin. He stopped, realizing he was about to consult the fleet consciousness before remembering it was gone. The decision was his alone. I choose wisdom over pride. We will withdraw. A good choice, Admiral, Octavia replied. Your neural network will restore once you leave this system. But you will remember what this felt like. You will carry the memory of standing alone. Jaren stepped forward. Guardian. A question, if I may. Speak, Captain Cross. How long have you been waiting for someone to find Earth? A soft laugh echoed through the channel. 307 years, Captain. We knew someone would come eventually. We knew they would see an empty world and think us gone. We counted on it. You let us think you were extinct. We let you believe what you wanted to believe. The greatest defense is not the one your enemy can see. It's the one they convince themselves doesn't exist. Bryn Castellan shook his head in amazement. You turned your entire world into bait. We turned our entire world into a lesson, Octavia corrected. Humanity learned to survive alone in the dark. We learned that the universe doesn't care about our fears, our needs, our desire for connection. We learned that strength comes from within, not from without. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a strange mixture of sadness and pride. You species built networks because you feared isolation. We embraced isolation because we understood it was inevitable. In the end, every being dies alone. Every consciousness faces the void singular. We simply learned to live that truth while we still drew breath. Admiral Davorin transmitted the withdrawal order, not through a neural network, but through direct communication channels, ship to ship, captain to captain. Each commander made their own choice to comply. Slowly, hesitantly, the Corvith fleet turned away from Earth. As they accelerated out of the system, the resonance field began to fade. The neural network flickered back to life, connections reforming like blood returning to numb limbs. But it felt different now. Tainted by the memory of silence. Captain Jaren Cross stood at his command nexus, feeling the familiar presence of the fleet consciousness return. But he kept one corner of his mind separate, isolated, his own. He would never forget the lesson. None of them would. Behind them, the Eternal Sentinel and its 11 sisters maintained their vigil. Silent. Patient. Alone. Guardian Octavia Wren settled back into her command throne, feeling the Sentinel systems pulse around her like a second heartbeat. She thought of the other Guardians, scattered across human space, each maintaining their solitary watch. They would never speak to each other. Never coordinate. Never connect. They didn't need to. Humanity had learned the hardest lesson the universe offered, that strength doesn't come from what you have, but from what you can survive without. And in the end, they had survived without everything. "Sleep well, my sisters," Octavia whispered to the void, knowing they couldn't hear her, knowing they didn't need to. In the darkness between stars, 12 titans stood watch. Each one utterly, perfectly, powerfully alone.